Hey everybody, this is Ralph with a longer video take on the Ace of Swords and thought. The primacy of thought, how important thoughts are in our day-to-day world, and why it is actually foolish to overlook our thoughts, our mindset about a great many things in life. James Allen, I was listening to a book of his on YouTube the other day, a little audio book. And the name of this book is As a Man Thinketh. One part of this book really jumped out at me. He says, thoughts solidify into habits, habits solidify into our outer reality. So he's talking about thoughts, how important thoughts are, and he's got a very good point. I think a point that hardly anybody can argue against. That what you think influences what you do, how you think about life, how you think about what things are important in life, what things are not important, will determine your habits, whether you're spending, time doing good things that will later, bring forth positive results, or whether you're just sitting around on the couch, drinking beer, eating potato chips, and watching TV. Yeah, you're not going to be getting very good results in life just doing that. But yeah, thoughts will solidify into habits, and then habits produce the results that we see in the world around us. So that is a very valid point, that thoughts indirectly create the things in our outer world, the things in our outer lives. Now, there's another school of thought that I think James Allen would agree with. James Allen was, I think, more of a mystical philosopher rather than strictly a hard science kind of guy. But there's another school of thought that claims that thoughts are actually things that cause other things. And now this is where a lot of people will tend to say, okay, this is pseudoscience, this is unproven. And yes, I would agree that it's very hard to prove things like this using the standard materialistic scientific method. But yet we do have experiences in our lives from day to day that do tend to confirm that thoughts can be more than just electronic impulses that happen in our head that influence our actions and our habits and then create our outer world indirectly. No, there is actually evidence that can suggest that thoughts are causes of the things that happen around us. Take, for example, you're thinking about somebody just out of the blue. A thought pops into your head. You think about somebody that you haven't heard from in months, maybe even years. And then later on that day, the phone rings. It's that person calling just out of the blue. Now, I think a lot of people have experienced something like that. Now, this isn't something that happens on a day-to-day basis, not for most people anyway, but it is something that happens often enough that when I mention this on video, a lot of people will say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I had that experience myself. Now, we can ask the question, why does that happen? I can think of three good explanations. First explanation, you're thinking about the person just out of the blue. Somehow that other person miles away somehow picks up on your thought energy unconsciously, unawares, and they decide out of the blue, I need to call this person. And so they call. Another way to explain it would be that you have the thought about the person because the other person, again, miles away from you, is thinking about you from out of the blue. Somehow you are psychically connected to that person in a rather unconscious way. and you think about the person, and then they call you because they were thinking about you first. Then there is the third explanation that says, poppycock, it's all just coincidence. And that could be the case too, because we do have instances in our lives where we think about somebody from out of the blue, they never call. And then other instances where you think of somebody out of the blue, you're pretty well focused, and then the phone rings, it's them. And I think that this happens on a regular enough basis that the explanation that says it's all done by coincidence is lacking. I think it comes up short. I think there's got to be something more to it than just coincidence. But I think that, yes, when we're talking about thoughts, thinking about thought, we're talking about something that happens inside our head, yes, but it also has a wider influence. Thoughts are more than just things that happen inside of our head. They can be reduced to, well, not reduced to electronic signals, but they can be detected by electronic means. And they can be detected by the effects it has on your blood pressure and on your human biology. But there are ways that you can detect thoughts through electronic means. And we can see this in the science of what Elon Musk is doing in Neuralink. I mean, Elon Musk is implanting chips in the brains of certain volunteer subjects to see if it's possible for them to use the power of thought to influence the chip that will in turn allow them to turn on a computer, maybe answer the phone, maybe dial the phone, things like that. Implanting a chip in the human brain that can be activated by a particular thought and then turn that thought happening in the inner life of the person into an outside event. And I think we are seeing this happening now. These experiments have been successful to a certain extent, actually to a pretty impressively large extent. And yeah, you've got test subjects ranging from monkeys to human beings that are using mechanical devices outside of themselves, hand-free, using a chip in their head. Now, I think with this latest level of technology and what we are seeing in our 3D brick and mortar world, that we have to admit that thoughts are things, that thoughts can actually be causes, not just effects, that they can cause things to happen in our outer world. Now, of course, with the Neuralink example, people can say it's not the thought that does it, it's the chip that does it. The thought is just secondary. I would say no, it's the thought that triggers it. The thought interacts with the chip, and the chip interacts with the mechanism that's outside in the outside world. But yeah, the power of thought is definitely very strong in that example. But I would also argue that even without a chip in your brain, it is possible for the world of thought to influence the world around you in a very real and concrete way. Another example I'm going to give of this is something that I witnessed when I was a cashier. I used to work for Walmart, one of my part-time jobs that turned into a full-time job a long, long time ago. But anyway, during the Christmas season, I was a cashier, knew a couple other cashiers. We were sitting in the break room talking, having our lunch, having our break after a pretty busy day, a pretty hectic day. And there were three of us there that really stood out at that table. One person that believed in the power of negative thinking. Everybody was an idiot. Everybody was stupid. The world sucked. That was her whole world view right there in a nutshell. And then the other two of us sitting there were more with the positive thinking crowd, okay? That, you think good thoughts, good things are going to happen eventually, maybe not right away, but your thoughts do have the power to influence what happens to you in the outer world. Well, this one person, thinking in terms of negativity, was just talking about what a bad day she was having, how stressful it was, how everybody that went through her checkout line were stupid, were idiots, were just morons. And of course, I could see where some of that was coming from, because this was the last minute shopping Christmas season. A lot of people put off shopping, and then they join the crowd. They go into the stores in mobs. And yeah, it's stressful for them, stressful for us cashiers, and it does create the point of view that a lot of people out there in the store are stupid or just lazy, tending to put things off, things like that. But that was her whole world view, is that everybody that went through her line was dumb, stupid, bitchy. She used a lot of different expletives that I don't really want to use on film, on camera here. But I mean, she was just going on and on and on. And then we had our front end manager, who was also working as a cashier that day to kind of take up the slack. And she was more of a positive thinking sort of individual. And she looked at me and she said, "Ralph, do you think that all of our customers are stupid?" And that's the way she put it. And that caused me to kind of smile and think. And I just thought about the customers that had come through my line. Yes, some of them had been stressed out. Some of them had been kind of goofy acting. But for the most part, a lot of them were very well behaved. I mean, good, decent people, intelligent people. They were just people who were out there doing their shopping, wanting to get home and wrap those Christmas gifts. And so I said, "Well, no, I don't think all of our customers are stupid." And she said, "Neither do I." And the other woman who was working the checkout line, who was engaged in the habit of negative thinking, she looked at both of us like we were freaking crazy. And I think she left that break room thinking that we were idiots too. But I mean, why is it that certain people can go through life with a negative attitude and tend to attract negative circumstances into their lives, negative happenings in their outer reality? And then why is it that other people can have more of a positive point of view? And while people like that are not necessarily, lucky 100% of the time, or people who experience only good things 100% of the time, but these are positive people who tend to experience more positive experiences in life than the average negative thinker. Is it that the quality of your thoughts somehow do have an impact in your outer world? And I would argue that it does, that they can, and that this is something that we should not ignore. The power of positive thinking over and above the habit of negative thinking. Bruce Lee, martial artist extraordinaire, once said, I think this was back in the 1960s, 1970s, but he said, "Never speak badly of yourself, not even in jest, because words have power. They don't call it spelling for nothing." Now, that's not an exact quote. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but words to that effect, that you should never speak negatively about yourself, about your life, about your circumstances. Bruce Lee was once asked, Master, what do we do when circumstances work against us? And Bruce Lee said, circumstances? I create my own circumstances. Now, that's a powerful way to think about your life, about yourself, about your circumstances in life. Circumstances are not just something that are handed over to you. Circumstances are something that you participate in creating yourself, whether you realize it or not. But yeah, Bruce Lee was definitely all about the power of thought. Another great thinker, and this guy dates back to the early 1900s, but Joseph Murphy, I'm mentioning him a lot in a lot of my tarot videos and New Thought videos. But he once gave the example of a guy who would go out shopping late at night, bad part of town. He'd go into this store. He would be talking with the owner of the store and the people working there about, how much crime there was in that neighborhood. And then he would always leave on the thought that, one of these days I'm going to get robbed and I'm going to get shot coming in here doing my shopping. And the people that worked at the store owner, they would say, don't think that. Don't say that. Don't even think that. You don't want to be going there. And yet, every time that he went into that store, he would kind of strike up a conversation. Hey, how's the weather? One of these days I'm going to get robbed and I'm going to get shot. And I mean, he just kept saying that. That was almost kind of like his mantra. And the way the story goes, according to Joseph Murphy, is that he was out one night. He did, in fact, get robbed. He was, in fact, shot and had to go into the hospital and recover. Now, you can ask the question, did his habit of negative thinking cause that to happen in his outer world? Or was that just coincidence? Again, I don't think we can chalk everything up to coincidence. I think at some point we do have to start taking responsibility for our own thoughts and the way that our thoughts could be influencing our outer world without us fully realizing this. And of course, the example of Neuralink, the chip in your brain that responds to your thoughts and then allows you to think about somebody and it'll dial the phone for you. Or have you think about a website, it'll turn on the computer and bring up that website for you. Allow you to play, Pong or other video games hands-free. I think with that level of technology, we really do have to start asking ourselves, how primary is thought to our outer reality? A lot of people, we tend to look at the outer reality. We think of it in terms of brick and mortar, physical, material things, because that's how we experience the world around us. This tarot card, piece of paper, kind of laminated, a nice pretty picture on it, some words on it. I've had it around. I've had it around for a great many years. Broke it out, started using it recently. And yeah, this tarot card is a physical thing. But is it only physical? What do we know about the physical world? What have we known about the physical world since at least the 1940s, and actually long before that? But in the 1940s, we knew that matter was actually energy when we detonated the first atomic bomb. First one in New Mexico, second one over Hiroshima, the third one over Nagasaki. And we've known undeniably since then that matter is actually energy. and it's energy that's held into a certain vibratory form, certain vibratory pattern by, what Max Planck referred to as being a divine mind. But yeah, something more powerful than the physical world holding all this energy together in the form of matter. But I mean, we know that matter is energy. E equals mc squared. Energy equals what is it? Mass times the speed of light squared, something like that. I'm not a theoretical physicist, so the full meaning of that is probably lost on me. But the bottom line is that matter is energy. Matter can be tweaked in such a way that you bring the energy out. Well, if matter is energy at its root level, let's just call it the root level. If matter is energy at the root level, and if your thoughts are energy, conscious energy, electrical signals that happen within your brain and can also be detected, outside of your brain. They have a wider impact on the world around us. And how wide of an impact, I don't really think we fully know yet or fully understand. But if matter is energy, couldn't the energy of your thoughts somehow play an effect on matter in the material world? Now, this is where things get quite controversial, and this is where mainstream science has not yet really been able to confirm that this is the full reality. But I mean, to me, it makes sense. And you've got researchers at the quantum level looking at matter, looking at how it seems to respond to human emotions, human feelings, the water experiments that were done by Dr. Emoto in Japan, where people would bless water and it would respond a certain way. They would curse water, would respond in a totally opposite way. I mean, yeah, a lot of these things have been condemned as pseudoscience and not really verified according to the strict scientific method. But I think from our day-to-day experiences, all of us have had experiences where there are things happening that really cannot be fully explained by the mechanistic science of, mainstream classical science. That there's something that goes beyond it that lies at the root of all things. And I would agree with the quantum researchers that are now coming out and saying that this missing element is consciousness, consciousness itself. And this is where people will have a field day calling this pseudoscience because it runs the opposite of the scientific method. I had a nice long talk with ChatGPT a few days ago, talking about scientific method, what is pseudoscience, what is philosophy, and what is spirituality. And the way it plays out is this: the scientific method, classical science, will take the material world, what we see, what we feel, what we can measure in the material world, and then we'll start to develop theories, explanations, do experiments based on what we can see, measure, feel within the material world. But it all starts with the material world being at the base. And where researchers in science tend to be awakening now is when they come to realize that the scientific method will explain a lot of things. It's brought us a lot of good inventions. It can explain how billiard balls will move on a pool table. If you shoot one pool ball a certain way in a certain direction, physics, determine, how the other balls are going to respond. And yes, hard science does a very good job of explaining that. Hard science has given us the internal combustion engine, heavier than air flight, the space age, the atomic age, all that. But where it breaks down is when science tries to explain consciousness, or where science tries to deal with matters like love. Why do we love one another? And it's like science will say, okay, it's about the chemicals in your body. It's about biological urges. It's about hormones, raging hormones, some days of the month, and not so raging hormones the remaining days of the month. But it can all be explained through science, chemistry, hormones, biology. But then you ask yourself the question, why have I been married to the same beautiful woman for 30 years, even though there have been a good 10 to 15 years of that experience where I have acted like a complete idiot? Do you explain that through biology? Do you explain that through hormones? Do you explain that through chemistry? Or is there something more transcendental at work here? Something that we cannot fully explain by materialistic science. And that's where things tend to break down. One researcher, forget his name now, but he did a lot of work in computer, microchips, things like that. And he made waves just a few years ago by saying that he used to believe that matter would give rise to consciousness. That if you had enough computer banks, if you had enough microchips, if you had enough this, that, and the other thing, if you had enough material stuff that was all wired together in a nice computer way, that you could create artificial intelligence, that you could create artificial consciousness. And he's now reversed his thinking on that. He says it is not the material that gives rise to consciousness. It's consciousness itself that gives rise to the material. Now, I don't know if this guy has ever read the Gospel of Thomas. But I mean, there's a beautiful saying in the Gospel of Thomas where Jesus talks about this very thing. It goes something like this. Jesus says, if the spiritual world gives rise to the material world, that would be a wonder. But if the material world gave rise to the spiritual world, that would be a wonder of wonders. And Jesus doesn't fully give the answer in that saying, but he's pointing to the problem. Is it the spiritual realm that gives rise to the material? Or is it the material realm that gives rise to the spiritual? Things like love, things like consciousness, things like hope, things like that, the transcendentals. And I think when we're thinking about our full life experience, there are things that mainstream science does a wonderful job of explaining. There are other things in which mainstream science falls flat. And that's where you come into other schools of thought, namely spirituality and philosophy. Spirituality is just the opposite of the scientific method. It doesn't start with the material and then try to extrapolate upward. It starts with the spiritual and then works its way down, from the creation stories of Genesis to the process of creation and the tree of life explained in Kabbalah. You start with the spiritual root and you extrapolate downward how the spiritual creates the material. Philosophy works in much the same way. It doesn't deal only with physics. It also deals with the metaphysics, the things beyond the material world that have to be taken into consideration in order to explain the fuller scope of reality. The weakness with spirituality, the weakness with philosophy, is that we've had theologians, spiritists, and philosophers for centuries. We've only recently gotten to the moon. supposedly in the 1960s. I believe we did. I was a kid then. I watched it on TV, so it's got to be true, right? But I mean, we're struggling to get back there again now. But I mean, it's science that made that moonshot possible. It's science that's making Neuralink possible. It's science that's making SpaceX possible. It's science that's making it possible for me to make a video and have it broadcast out there to who knows how many people. Maybe 5, 10, maybe 100, maybe 1,000, who knows? Maybe this one will go viral. You never really know. But I mean, yeah, science has its strong points, but it also has its weak points. And I think that when we're looking at the totality of life, we have to take all things into consideration. And that includes the power of thought. Whether you believe that thoughts are things that can cause other things to happen in the world around you, or that thoughts become things, either way, you have to admit that thoughts are foundational. If you spend the majority of your time in good, healthy thinking about who you are, a good, healthy self-image, a good, healthy look at the world around you, how the world is structured, whether or not you have a chance of success in this world or not, those thoughts are going to influence how things happen to you in this life. Thoughts are going to make the difference between success and failure. So don't forget the primacy of thought. Whether you believe that thoughts are foundational, that they are things themselves, or whether you believe that thoughts become things, thoughts are important. Good thoughts can bring you good results. Negative thoughts will bring you negative results. Choose the ones that you want in your life and feed the right thoughts. Ralph signing out. Have a good one. Talk soon.